December has come and gone, which means it's time to wrap up all of the books that I read in the last month of the year. I ended off the year with a fantastic month. Not my best of the year, but by no means the worst. So let's get into the stats and the books. So in December, I read a total of 18 books and I DNF'd 3 of them, which gave me a grand total of 5,738 pages with 64 hours of audiobook listening. So we'll start as always with my DNFs, of which again there were 3 of them. So first up was Baby It's Caught Outside by Cassidy, which is a sequel to Deck the Halls. It's a queer Christmas holiday rom-com, and while I enjoyed the first book, the second book just wasn't that interesting to me. I DNF'd A Holly Jolly Ever After by Simone and Julie Murphy, which is part of that like Merry Little Meet Cute series. I can't think of what it's actually called, but whatever that series is called. I love that series, but this book, while I don't think it's a bad book in general, it is a bad book for me personally because I cannot handle secondhand embarrassment, and this one had that in abundance, and I couldn't do it. I tried to stick it through. There was a scene that happened where I like literally just stopped reading this mid-sentence and closed the audiobook and was like, actually I'm done now, I cannot continue. So I'm sure a great book, just not for me personally. Finally, I DNF'd Our Vicious Descent by Hayley Dennings, which is the sequel to a book that I always forget the name of. It's a YA vampire fantasy with like gangs set in I think like 1920s Harlem, that kind of thing. The vibes are immaculate. I love the setting of this. However, the characters embody everything that I've grown to dislike about YA. They're very dramatic, very over the top, and I just wasn't in the mood for it, and I don't see myself ever being in the mood for that one, so I did DNF this one and the whole series. I have a couple of books that I will not be giving ratings to because I don't give ratings to things like nonfiction and poetry. So first up is How Far the Light Reaches, which is a collection of essays that is part information about like sea creatures and part memoir. This was a really interesting way to write a memoir. I thought it was very unique and memorable. My other nonfiction of the month was Truth Telling by Michelle Good. I learned so much from this teeny tiny little book. There is so much important information packed into these very few pages. Michelle Good is a survivor of the 60s scoop, and she's now also a lawyer fighting for Indigenous rights. So this book is 7 essays talking about Indigenous history as well as modern day thoughts and feelings of Indigenous people, and it was fascinating and very eye-opening. I've done plenty of self-teaching where I do have a fairly good idea of what has historically happened to Indigenous people in North America, but I didn't know a lot about the legal proceedings and kind of what has happened since then, and this book goes into detail about a lot of that topic. There was so much in here that I didn't know about, and it was fascinating and heartbreaking to learn, and as much as this was an extremely difficult book to read, it's such an important one, so I definitely recommend for anyone from North America to pick this one up. It was phenomenal. I didn't have any 1 star, 1.5, 2, or 2.5 star reads this month, so love that for me, but I did have 2 3-star reads. First up was It's a Fabulous Life by, I think, Kelly Farmer, I want to say. Any of the holiday romance ones that I read that were part of that video that I posted, I'm not really going to go in detail about because I have a whole long video on them, but I gave this one a 3-star. It was fine. My other 3-star was Our Winter Monster. This one is a Christmas horror novel, and it had such good potential. It could have been really, really good. It had a bunch of things that could have made it super creepy, and somehow this book ended up not being creepy at all. There was zero tension, no atmosphere, nothing really felt high stake. The characters just kind of felt like they were fumbling around in the snow for a few hundred pages, and that was about it. So not a bad book, but it was definitely a letdown. My 3.5 stars included You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince, which was another one in the queer holiday romance video that I did. Same with Deck the Halls by Cassidy. I love this one. It's a little novella and it was hilarious. And then my other 3.5 stars from that video were The Holiday Trap, which is one that I was not going to read. I started it and put it down because I was kind of over Christmas romances at that point in time, but then I watched The Holiday, the movie, and loved it and picked this book back up and actually had a pretty good time with it. And then The Merriest Misters, which was reminiscent of the Santa Claus, the Tim Allen movie, and I quite enjoyed that one as well. Otherwise, for my 3.5 stars, I also read Hot Girls with Balls. This one I read as part of a vlog that I'm working on where I retry books that I DNF'd, and while I didn't like love this book by any means, it was still really interesting and I had a pretty good time with it. What Stalks the Deep by T. Kingfisher is the 3rd book in the Sworn Soldier series, the first one being What Moves the Dead. The first half of this was so good. It was exactly the kind of creepy, suspenseful horror that I love this author for, but unfortunately the creepy parts parts of it didn't last nearly as long as I feel like it should have. All of the fantastic buildup that this book had was over way too early, and the rest of the book wasn't necessarily boring, but just wasn't what I was looking for. It kind of stopped being a horror pretty early on, at least for me personally. So while it was still really good, it wasn't as good as I was hoping it would be, but I still had a fantastic time with this one. Every Spiral of Fate by Tahereh Mafi. This is the 4th book in the This Woven Kingdom series. I have mixed feelings about this book. The first chunk, so boring. The middle had me gripped, like completely obsessed with the romance and the characters and everything that was going on. And then the last chunk of it was so frustrating and kind of annoying to read. So there's definitely some really high highs with this book, but also some very low lows. In terms of the plot, I honestly don't really know what's happening in this series. I lost the plot quite a while ago, but I'm just in it for the romance and the characters because that is where this series shines for me. The pining, the yearning, the writing surrounding the romance is just incredible. And if I ever had somebody think about me the way that Cyrus thinks about Alizé, I would probably pass away immediately. I love the romance in this so much, and I love the majority of the side characters. I really dislike Cameron. I think he's so annoying, and he was honestly the majority of my frustration with the last chunk of the book because I just wanted him to shut the fuck up. I don't know if I'll continue the series. I'm not overly excited to see where things go from here. I also have no idea how long this series is going to be, but I'm hoping that the next book will be the last one, and if that's the case, then I'll probably read it. But if there are going to be more books after that, I probably will just DNF it here. But as is, I still like this book enough to give it a 3.5 star. And this one was also my final book of 2025. And then last for the 3.5 stars was Holly by Adalyn Grace. This one is the Christmas novella in the Belladonna series. And like, this was fine. It was nice to see the characters again and kind of see how they're doing, and the plot was pretty fun as well. But I really didn't feel like it was a necessary book, but I liked it well enough. Moving on to my 4 stars. The ones that I read for the Christmas romance vlog were A Jingle Bell Mingle by Sierra Simone and Julie Murphy, which was my favorite of that video. And then Second Chances in Newport Stephen by, is that TJ Alexander, I think, which was also fantastic. And aside from that, my only other 4-star was Dead and Breakfast by Rosiee, Thor, and Kat Hillis, I think. This was hilarious. I have been looking forward to this book for months, just desperately waiting for it to come out. And my Libby hold came in fairly quickly as well, so I kind of blew through this book right away. I think I listened to the audiobook in like a day and a half. Plot-wise, it did kind of lose me a little bit here and there. Some of the plot was a bit convoluted in some places, and while I loved how silly this book was, there were a few places where it felt like it was too silly, which took down my enjoyment just a little bit. But overall, this was a delightful read, and I absolutely adored it. I love these characters. The couple in this made me think of the couple in The Old Guard, which is one of my favorite couples ever. The comic is great as well, but the movie is where it's at. But this couple was very similar in vibes to that one, and that brought me so much joy. I would love to watch a TV show about these two as well, and I'm really hoping that this book becomes a series. And then I had no 5 stars this month, so the rest of mine were all 4.5 stars, starting with The Return of the King by Tolkien. I finally read this book. I finally finished the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I started it about 10 years ago, I want to say. This was by far the series that's been on my ongoing series list the longest. It's been haunting me for many years, so I'm glad that I finally finished it, and I loved this so much. It was wonderful in every way. It did have a little bit of a hard time holding my attention in some parts because it's so meandering, but for the most part, this was a fantastic book and an excellent end to the series. I love The Hobbit. Just the unending hope of the Hobbits fills me with so much joy. Even when they're facing the darkest of times, I just love how they still have this way of focusing on the positives, and I will cherish this story for the rest of my life. I also gave 4.5 stars to Brigands and Breadknives by Travis Baldree, which is the 3rd book in the Legends and Lattes series, and also my favorite in the series. It follows Fern, who moves her bookshop to the same town as the characters in the 1st book, but she's still feeling kind of lost in her life, so she kind of ends up on an adventure, and I just had an absolute blast with this book. It was so much fun. It was exciting and heartwarming and just all the things that I love in a book, and I can definitely see myself reading it again in the future. Finally, the last book was To Be Taught Fortunate by Becky Chambers. I finally read this one, and I am ecstatic that I finally read this book. It was amazing. This is so my kind of book in every way. It's very quiet and like not really plot driven, but it's just really about these characters and their lives together as they're traveling through space and discovering life on new planets and playing in space dirt, and it was just so wonderful. This was a beautiful, beautiful book, and absolutely one that I'll read again and again. Same with pretty much all of Becky Chambers' books. I love all of them, at least the ones that I've read so far. And this book solidified Becky Chambers as being one of my favorite authors of all time as well. So those are all the books that I read in December. So before we wrap things up, let's get into the superlatives. So the best book of the month was obviously To Be Taught a Fortunate. It was such a wonderful book. It was closely tied with The Return of the King, but To Be Taught a Fortunate did have to take the cake for that one. The worst book was Our Winter Monster, just because it had such good potential and it did not live up to that at all. Biggest surprise, I didn't really have any, to be honest. Like, all the ones that I liked, I knew that I was gonna like, so nothing really surprised me at all this month, so I'm gonna leave that one blank. Biggest disappointment, I'm gonna give to Every Spiral of Fate, unfortunately. Not that it was a bad book, but it just wasn't nearly as good as I was hoping it would be, and just given how much I loved the first two books in the series. Book 3 was kind of mid, but I was really hoping to feel the same level of joy that I did from the first two books, and I just did not get there. Most memorable was definitely Dead and Breakfast. This was hilarious and definitely a unique read that I'll think about for a long time. Most forgettable was definitely Holly by Adalyn Grace. Again, this just didn't really feel like it was a necessary book, and I don't think it'll even cross my mind when I think about this series. Best audiobook was Brigands and Breadknives. The narrator did such an amazing job at bringing this book to life, especially in the voice that she did for Fern. I thought her voice was just so perfect. And finally, the prettiest cover has to go to How Far the Light Reaches. I love these colors so much. It's such a beautiful cover. And there we have it. There is my December reading wrap up. Let me know what books you read in December, as well as your best and or worst book that you read last month. I would love to hear your thoughts. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world, and I'll catch you in the next video.